Today we're talking keyboard origins. Not vintage instruments, not old instruments, but the actual arrangement of the 12-note scale that turns into a keyboard. Stick around. Hi, this is Ted with Alamo Music Center in downtown San Antonio, Texas.
I'm Patrick Marr. You can find us online at alamomusic.com. If you haven't already, please subscribe to our YouTube channels, check out our other videos, sign up for notifications, like our videos, leave us comments. We appreciate your support and we love to interact with you. Ted, hit me with the history of the keyboard.
This is kind of neat because I went back looking for if you just take the scale, well, you have to even go before the basic scale.
Pre-scale.
Pre-scale. This is pre-scale music history. Piano 101,
It's
I guess.
like AD and BCE. It's like this is pre-scale of music.
What happens is that this is interesting, the 3rd century before the Common Era. So this is like the Greeks invented a thing called a hydraulis.
Is that long ago?
It was that long ago.
Wow.
So that's like somewhere between 200 and 300 BC.
Wow.
And what this thing is, believe it or not, is it's essentially a pipe organ. But instead of pipes, they use like different level flutes, which is like pipes. And they had a giant air tank in there that they filled halfway up with water. Then they pump the water out of it and the water goes up above it and around it. And you have a little hand pump that just puts air pressure back into the air tank. But that water keeps the pressure in it so that when the air comes out by pressing down on a key, it's constant. It doesn't waver. Okay, so if you press more than one key, it's actually polyphonic, and you get 2 flute sounds coming out. I guess you could push all 7 down because that's how many keys the first one had, 7 keys. And it had the notes A through G.
Did it change the volume depending on how
There was
you
no
hit?
volume. Everything was equal, just straight volume. The only thing that was consistent on this instrument was the air pressure. It's kind of fascinating. There's a few
But like
videos.
when you hit 2 at the same time, does the air pressure release differently?
The air pressure it just comes out between the 2 pipes. Okay. But you have to have a person there that's continually pumping, or sometimes you see a guy with a foot pedal. There's different contraptions of it. And what I find interesting is that hydraulis is the beginning of a concert grand piano. But it's a long story.
It's a long story.
Thousands of years. There's a lot of work in it. But through that instrument, and the keys aren't anywhere near like the keys now. They're almost like those tongue depressors that a doctor uses. They're like fat little wooden wedges, and they're just there, and they lean, and air comes out and goes through the.
And there were 7 of them.
There were 7 of them. So you don't have a whole lot of range for music expression. It's mostly background. The idea behind the hydraulis is that it was a permanently tuned instrument that other musicians using, variable pitch violins and drums and lutes and stuff like that could tune to and play along with. And so it was just kind of there as a base. And it kind of stays like the keyboard doesn't get a whole lot of revisions
what was the
adding
7 notes
extra keys.
too?
The 7 notes were A through G.
Okay, so A, B, C, D, E, F,
G.
and G.
And the first thing they probably did to complete that was go up to A, B, C again, so that you had your first octaves. Okay. However, that just kind of is the idea of a keyboard releasing air pressure. And so with this water pipe organ and the keyboard, you kind of get the idea of a stringed harp and a harpsichord coming together, but by the time that happens, there's already black keys assigned. So we need to talk specifically about where does the black keys, or for correct thing would be the pentatonic scale, those 5 notes that make up the black keys, where do they come from? Well, that's actually an Asian influence, and that is a scale from about the Middle East all the way over to the Far East. And that type of scale was actually incorporated in between the white keys on the A through G in the year 1361. So here we are like 13 or 1400 years later after the hydraulis, and there's a Halberstadt organ in Germany that had put the 5 black keys in ranges of 2 and 3 in between
So you have the option to be a half step between anything.
between anything.
And so any starting point could basically have either a pentatonic scale or, or it allows you to do...
It depended how many keys you had. See, part of the problem is...
It allows you to go chromatic, though.
If you go chromatic, this was a 12-note chromatic scale.
7 plus 5, right?
That was right around the year 1400. And so that's when you start getting perfection of pipe organs, you start getting perfection of harpsichords, and you start looking at
early
precursors to other kind of keyboard applications that come a couple hundred years after that. But what's really fascinating is how they started to add an octave. And what's natural about that original key from A through G is that you have the C major scale built into there if you add on those top 3 notes. So you have the C major scale. If you start on C and go straight up to another C, that's the C major scale as we know it. And then you go with the A minor scale from A to A, straight up the white keys.
The 2 most common.
The 2 most common, even to this day. Those are the most common key signatures for almost all music worldwide. And it's kind of fascinating that it starts off with the hydraulics.
And you think of like the church modes too, where it's like it was just a new starting point and continuing, but our ear is most accustomed to hearing C to C or A to A as the minor scale.
And so the other things that happen is you start getting this 12-note scale repeated. Okay, so you have the 12-note chromatic scale that repeats not just for 1 octave or 2 octaves, they start adding 3 octaves to it.
Yeah.
There isn't a whole lot of range up and above beyond 3 to 4 octaves, all the way up through around Mozart's time. He didn't have a complete 88 key, neither did Beethoven.
But it was like 5 was like the max, right?
It was getting there. Yeah, it was getting there. 61 or 61 note keyboards were pretty common for pianos and for harpsichords back then. And there was a lot of other instruments in between there that I know we're leaving out that actually complete the harpsichord from the pipe organ. There was the clavecine, there was a clavichord, there was a simple 1-note thing.
But the idea was to pluck a string and have response.
Some of them were just a little octave, almost like a tiny wind-up music box. So, and those were called virginals. People would keep those in their bedrooms or their sleeping quarters, just so they could have a little bit of music to ease. However, eventually you get down to where you settle, where there's 52 white keys and 36 black keys. And so you're kind of looking at the standard 7 1/4 octave piano that shows up somewhere around the late 19th century. Because there were a lot of 85-note pianos that were built before they completed the scale. And if you range and you think about a piano being ranged from C to C, well, then it makes perfect sense from a technician standpoint that the lowest C, that one is actually called C1. And then the B flat, and the A beneath it are A0, B flat 0, and B0. And so the rest of them are numbered. Now, on the Bosendorfers that go down to the 92 keys, I think they have, the low C?
Yeah, they go to C0, some of them.
Some of them go down to C0. And there was actually, I saw in one thing I was reading, there was actually a 108-note made piano.
Yeah.
And I think they went up to the higher end.
Yeah, it's just they expanded it.
But it's kind of fascinating because that keyboard touch, and you can find, there is a video of the oldest working pipe organ in the world. And when you watch the person playing it, it's like, I'm glad I don't have to play that keyboard. It's just so rickety looking.
Well, I think it would be interesting. We're going to take a break and listen to kind of the 7-note limited instrument that would have, the melody that would have been, 300 BCE, being limited to 7 white notes. We're going to take a listen here just to hear kind of what that limiting was, kind of show it and hear it. Then we'll come back and then we'll hear the pentatonic scale, just so you can kind of get a visual and sound representation of what these sounds sounded like isolated and then kind of coming together, and how you really see it's this beautiful blend of Western culture and Eastern culture in these these really nice sounds that complement each other and kind of bring all music together. So let's take a listen first to the 7, and then we'll listen to the 5.
Patrick, just demonstrating those two scales, the pentatonic and then the straight 7-note scale, reminds me of the video I shot with Cooper. We did a white key jam and then we did a black key jam.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking that is one way to go about just freelancing and teaching yourself piano. Stick on the white keys, jam a whole bunch, and then stick on the black keys.
A lot of people do learn piano that way, and with that you see them do the fist roll,
right,
and play on the black keys only, and then then they open up their hands and they start just playing on the black notes, and they're like, wait, this actually sounds kind of good together.
It doesn't take much to get some pleasing tones out of it.
And it's visually striking that it's a pattern. It's a pattern that makes sounds, and your ear really allows you to follow the pattern.
It does, and what's fascinating is by combining what they once called the 7+5 scale. It was referred to the 7+5 as like, hey, we have a church organ. What kind of scale is 7+5? That means, it wasn't just white keys. It had other stuff on it. But what that eventually did is it eventually forced the concept of, okay, this organ's a little different at this church than it is over there. There's commonality in the tones, but how do you scale each instrument so they're the same? And the problem they first started having was like equal temperament. It's like all the organ instruments and harpsichords had to be tuned as close to equal temperament to get along with other musicians.
Well, all the intervals needed to be consistent between it so that you could replicate and start at a new place.
But the reference pitch of A being at 440 was never really truly defined until the last century. Up until then, it was almost up to each manufacturer's. And I know you've been here long enough where you see those old pianos that come in, those saloon pianos, and it says tuned to 436 right across the top, because it probably won't go to 440. The pin block may not hold the tensions.
Yeah,
and so there's a lot of these narrowing down the pitches.
And then you read about some concert pianist, or they take it to the next degree, and they're like, oh, I only play pianos at 442, or
right.
And it's interesting because that's basically the sample rate to your ear, right? So let's explain 440. It's how many it's how many frequencies are happening.
It's how many
in a
times
second.
the string goes up and down a second. But with each one of those going up and down, that string breaks in half, then it breaks into 3, then each of those 3 break into half. In each little section is a different note coming out of it. And I often thought that the A being tuned at 440, I really think that had something to do with some scientist, mathematic guy sitting around there playing that note and saying, that's the one, that's the note right there. That is the international vibrational standard of a fly going by your ear. That's A at 440. And so I think that's what happened. This is my theory. All pianos ended up starting to get tuned at that same reference pitch. That was a problem because if you were a vocalist or a lead violinist or an opera singer like that as a vocalist, you would notice that this organ over at this church is tuned a little bit better than the one over at this church.
And I think it's also fascinating to think when the octave hits, when you go from A440 to the next A.
Half.
It's exactly, so it's either 880 on the top side or
220
on the bottom side. And so you see this really beautiful kind of golden ratio thing that's happening with music. And once you cut it again in half, it's like it's the 4th, and you cut it again, and it's the 5th. And so these are the intervals that are so powerful to our ears and it's all just based in science and based in vibrations. And
it's supposed to activate certain circuitry in your hearing center inside your brain. And the problem with that is there's been a lot of scientific studies, and you can see this all over the internet, particularly on YouTube videos. You go in and look at them, where people will take an alternative take on a recording or a sound. Instead of making it 440, they make it 432. And a lot of times people will tune to 432 because the symmetry and the beauty of the geometry is more precise than it is at 440, because the partials are perfect. They're perfecter, I should say, because nothing's ever really perfect. But when these guys put sand on top of a board and they have a speaker underneath it and they run vibrations through it, a 1st and a 5th, and it makes a star pattern and it goes to it, those things don't show up so well tuned at 440. But at 432, it's gorgeous. You can see the sounds.
So, and this is kind of the magic of music. It is. And we're going to do a video on vibrations here in a little bit, and it all ties together. it's those people say, oh, I'm musically deaf, or I don't have the ear. They can still tell when there's a clashing of symmetry, when there's a seventh played, when you hear this dissonance, when you hear a tritone, it's something in you is alerted, and it's just so interesting that you can trace this all the way. We traced it back to the 3rd, 4th century BCE today, but you can trace this hundreds of thousands of years ago and just chanting in a jungle. Right. Can you imagine people just harmony? Like you don't even have to have words. You can just release
That's where the Tibetan ooms come from.
Yeah, and
all the
it's
different notes and dissonance.
It's incredible that you come to today and we have such power, such control over frequency, and really we're trying to diagnose it and break it down into scientific terms. But really, it's like it's already existed. We're just quantifying it at this point.
We're not letting it flow. We're fooling with it and looking at it instead of using it.
And so the perfections and imperfections of music. But what I really love about this video is I think it's it's culture, it's history, it's science, math, it's visual symmetry. The pattern that we see on a piano.
It's what I call life. It's all based on vibrations.
It's good It's the Beach Boys. It's all picking up good vibrations. And it's incredible that we're able to enjoy it and see it from a macro lens at this point, and who knows what the future will hold and how much more macro that lens can get. But but really just taking a step back and being appreciative of the keyboard, of that 7+5, of that 12, of Eastern and Western culture coming together and creating a cool tool that we use so in such a beautiful way today.
Right.
So thank you guys for watching. This was a history lesson in the origin story of the keyboard. If you want to watch more great content, please make sure you're subscribed. We're going to try to do more great history videos and talk about piano brands, but also talk a little bit about music and how we consume it and how how it's pleasing to us. So thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe and make sure you're up to date on some of our cool videos we're releasing. Ted Barslew, I'm Patrick Marr. Thanks for watching.